Joe, it's you. Tap, tap, tap. Something for sure. And the girls 100% believe it's their mom. Again, they are thrilled. And so the girls, they start walking down the stairs, firing off more questions from their mom. And even though some of their questions weren't really yes or no questions, they would always get that sort of tap, tap, tap response. Like, again, something is interacting with them. And as they made their way down to the first floor and they're hearing this tapping, they're sort of following it around, it eventually brings them to the head of the stairs that leads down into the basement. They open up the basement door and they're asking more questions. They're getting those tap responses, and it's clearly coming from downstairs. And even though the girls are really excited, it's gotta be Mom, they weren't so confident that they were prepared to go down into the basement to follow after this tapping sound. So they sort of stopped at the top of the stairs, looking down into the basement. It's gotta be Mom, but it's still a little bit frightening to go down there. And so they stayed there right above the stairs, looking into the basement, just constantly asking questions and getting responses from down in the basement from Mom. It was great. Eventually, after 30 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever it was, the tapping just stopped. The girls continued asking questions, but there was no longer any reaction from the basement. And so at that point, the girls, they're so excited. They really feel like they've been talking to their mom, and they're so jazzed up with this experience that they're like, we're not going to be able to sleep. And so the girls just stay awake in the kitchen until Frank comes home from work. And when Frank comes inside and he sees his girls are awake, and it's like midnight or whatever it is, he's sort of surprised. But the girls rush up to him and they're like, Dad, you couldn't believe it. We had this seance, and we heard this tapping sound, and we know it was Mom. Mom is with us right now. We were talking to her. Now, Frank, is totally caught off guard by what they're saying, but he also knows his girls, they're going through this horrible time in their lives. They just lost their mother. He can't even imagine their level of grief. He's obviously grief-stricken, but this is their mom. And so he's seeing his girls for the first time in what feels like a long time, looking really happy and excited, and they're telling him that tapping sounds in the house are their mother. And so Frank, he's not going to pick holes in what they're doing. He's not going to question, what's actually happening in the house. Instead, as soon as they tell him all this stuff, he just goes, you know what, girls, of course your mom is here. Your mom will always be here. She will always be looking out for you. Your mom is with you right now in the house. Sure. And so the girls, they're so happy. Again, this was such an amazing experience. Their dad also agreed this is so good. And so the girls, they happily go upstairs to their bedrooms and they go to sleep. And Frank, truthfully, after having this exchange with his daughters, didn't really think much of it. Again, he's sort of thinking that, there wasn't really tapping sounds coming from his deceased wife. This is just some coping mechanism that the girls are using to deal with this tragedy. And he thinks, it's healthy enough, it's making them happy. What's the big deal? And so Frank, he goes to bed. Over the next few days, the tapping sounds in the house would continue. And they were no longer just coming from the basement. They were also coming from the kitchen. They were coming sometimes from the second floor. They were sort of coming from all over the house. But the girls were the only ones who could hear the sounds. Every time they hear the tapping, if their dad was home, they'd call him over. Frank wouldn't hear anything. Now again, Frank doesn't really believe that there's actually tapping happening. He doesn't think this is actually real at all. But he's playing along with it because, his girls are happy. Clearly this is their coping mechanism. And so again, Frank's not thinking much of it. It's harmless. The girls are frustrated that he can't hear it, but again, it's overall still a very good thing. It's Mom. Mom is trying to communicate with them. However, after a few days, post-seance, as the tapping continued, the girls began to change their attitude about the tapping sounds. The first day, and over those first few days, it really did feel like a good thing. This is Mom. This is positive. This was definitely a good thing. But after about 72 hours, post-seance, the girls began to sort of feel frightened by the tapping. Because the tapping no longer was really just coming mostly from the basement. It now started coming almost exclusively from their bedrooms at night. So they were laying in bed, they'd hear tapping underneath their beds, they'd hear tapping in their closets, and it was frightening. And they would call their dad in and come into their bedrooms, and he wouldn't find anything. But now, Frank, who previously had just sort of let this continue, this is his girl's coping mechanism for this terrible loss. Now he's seeing that his girls, they don't really think it's Mom anymore. They don't know what this is. And it's also disrupting their sleep. And so now it's not a healthy thing anymore. This is a problem. Like, it's disrupting his girls' lives. And so Frank begins at this point, 3 days post-seance now, he begins telling his girls, like, hey, come on, guys, there's nothing to be scared of here. These tapping sounds are just normal house sounds. You're overthinking it. Like, there's nothing that's going to harm you in the house. Mom is definitely here looking out for you, but she's not making those tapping sounds. You gotta let this stuff go and just forget about this stuff. But the girls, they're like, Dad, we're not making the tapping sounds up. Just because you don't hear them does not mean they're not real. And they began to tell their dad, like, we think the seance worked, but we actually no longer think it's Mom that's sort of come out of the seance. We think we unlocked a different spirit, an evil spirit. And now that evil spirit is haunting our house. So Frank, at this point, he's like, guys, that's not what's going on here. You really need to stop. Like, these tapping sounds are not real. They're in your head or they're normal. And so Frank and his daughters really began to fight over this because the girls, they know they're hearing sounds. And Frank's like, I'm not. And so they're really starting to fight over it. The girls, they're getting more and more frightened just being in their house, in particular at night when these sounds would typically start. And so fast forward about a week after the seance, and now the girls really are so scared in their house because of this tapping, which they believe is now this evil spirit in their house. They're finding all sorts of excuses to just stay out of their house. Like when Dad's at work, they're trying to stay at their friend's house and not be home because it was too frightening. And Frank, he's sort of at his wit's end with what to do with his girls, because now this thing that's going on in the house, this delusion, as he believed it was, that his girls were suffering from, it was really disruptive and unhealthy. And he began telling his girls, like, if you can't stop with this whole tapping delusion, you're going to have to go to grief counseling. This is too much. And so, again, fast forward about a week here, and that's what's going on in the Bowen household. And on this particular day, the girls, Tina and Karen, they didn't have a place to go that night. They didn't have a friend who was available. And so they're home at their house, alone. Frank's out for the night doing a late night shift. And the girls, they're in their kitchen, just kind of hanging out. They're pretty anxious here. And they start to hear tapping sounds coming from the basement. Now, by this point, the tapping sounds were so common that just hearing the tapping sounds was not like this horribly frightening thing. It was just sort of this very unsettling thing where nobody knew what they were. And again, the girls think it's something evil. But on this night, the girls are alone. Dad's gone. Tina, the older of the two, she says to Karen, like, Dad doesn't believe us. He does not believe that there's tapping sounds in the house. And so we, right now, need to go down in the basement and investigate. Because if we don't, no one's ever going to look into this. Like, nobody believes us. Karen is horrified at the idea. Karen's the 9-year-old going down into the basement, to go see what this tapping is. But she doesn't want to be away from her sister. And so she's like, okay. And so Tina gets a knife from the kitchen. She goes to the door to the basement. Karen follows right behind her. And Tina, she opens up the door. And the two girls begin going down the steps. And once they get to the bottom of the steps, they're in the basement, just this kind of blank slate down there. There's a washing machine and a dryer, there's some boxes, but it's just sort of a dank, sort of open, nothing cellar down there. And the girls, when they got down there, they're looking for the origin of this tapping sound. And on some level, they expected to find something that was making these sounds because they've been hearing these sounds. For them, it's not a delusion. Like, every time they hear these sounds, they are real to them. Just because their dad doesn't hear it does not mean it's not real to them. And if you look at the beginning, when they first started hearing the sounds, they thought it was their mom. And they never really fully investigated. They maybe didn't want to find out that, perhaps the tapping sound was, a washing machine or something. Because that would destroy the illusion that it was their mom. So they never fully investigated then. And then the next few days after that, when it sort of transitioned and became a scary thing, the girls also never really investigated because it was scary now. They didn't want to know what was making this tapping sound. And so now, here we are, a week into this, and they've gone down into the basement where they've heard the tapping sounds, and they're like prepared to see something that is making this sound because it's real for them. Like maybe it's a raccoon or some animal that's gotten into their house, but there has to be something because they hear these sounds. But now they're looking around this basement. There's nothing. There's nothing that could possibly make this sound. And the girls are horrified. And so after being down there only for a couple of minutes, Tina, who's got the kitchen knife, she's like, Karen, let's get out of here. Like, this isn't right. Let's get out of here. And And so the girls turn around and go back up the steps. As they do, they notice something on the stairway wall that they didn't see on the way down.
Oh, crap.
Written in red on the wall are the words, "I'm in your closet, come find me."
Oh, crap.
And when the girls see that, they are horrified. And they
Okay.
sprint up the stairs,
You
they
got that right.
bolt out of their house, they go to their neighbor's house, start banging on the neighbor's door. The neighbor comes to the door and he's like, "What's going on?" And the girls are like, "Oh my God, we had this seance, we've been hearing tapping in the walls, and now somebody's written on the walls, we don't know what's going on." And the neighbor is so confused, really doesn't understand what's happening. And he's like, "Look, girls, just come into my house. You're safe here. We'll wait for your dad to come home. He'll know what to do." And so the girls, they're hysterical. They go into the neighbor's house, they shut the door, and they wait. And then a little bit later, Frank Bowen, their dad, he comes home. The neighbor immediately flags him down and calls him over. And he's like, "Look, here's what happened. Your girls came over. They said, something about writing on the walls. I don't know." And Frank's like, "Okay, all right." He tells his girls, like, "Look, stay here. You're safe here. I'll go check the house and make sure nobody's in there." Frank, at this point, in no way suspects that there's anything, evil or bad in his house. He thinks this is just a continuation of this delusion the girls are sort of acting out. And so Frank, alone, goes back to his house. He opens up the door, he goes inside, he searches the house, and he looks everywhere, but there's nobody in the house. He does find the writing in the stairwell going down to the basement. It does say, "I'm in your closet, come find me," but it's written in ketchup. And so after, again, searching the whole house and finding nothing other than this writing, Frank goes back over to the neighbor's house. He talks to his girls, and he's not mad at them. In some ways, he feels like all of this is basically his fault. Like, he should have handled this more aggressively at the beginning, and he let it get to this point. And so he tells his girls,
Oh my God, I forgot something.
That you wrote those words on the wall. I know that all of
Okay,
this
it's
is
not too late.
a delusion that's playing out that
Oh my
started
goodness,
with something
what's
good.
going
You
on
thought it
in
was
my
mom,
head?
but
I
now it's
almost
become
closed this
something
back
that
up.
isn't good. It's disruptive. You
Oh
convince
my
yourself the
God.
house is haunted, and I'm very worried that this is a product of grief. Like,
It's not
grief
too late
is leading you to do these things, and
get
it
it.
needs to stop.
And
And so starting tomorrow, you're going to go into grief counseling. We need professional help here to make sure you girls are taken care of. I should have done this from the beginning, so we're going to make that happen right now. Now, the girls knew they didn't write that on the wall. They're not making the tapping sounds. But they also knew their dad 100% didn't believe them, like zero, and it was not going to change. And on some level, like, they think maybe there's truth to what he's saying. Maybe they are so grief-stricken that they've convinced themselves of things that are not real. And so in this sort of vulnerable moment where the girls are totally upset about what they've seen and what they've heard, they just tell their dad, like, "Fine, like, whatever, we'll go to grief counseling." And so sure enough, the next day, the girls would start grief counseling, and right away, all the tapping in the house, all the writing on the walls, all that stuff stopped. Like, peace returned to the Bowen household, at least at first.
almost forget.
As you may already know, I recently was on tour. Me and my team spent 4 weeks traveling in a bus around the country, telling stories live to thousands of people. It was totally incredible and surreal. But I've got to say, the best part of the whole experience was just getting to interact with you all in person, fans of the strange, dark, and mysterious. And also, pretty much everybody turned out in flannel. It was a sea of thousands of people rocking the flannel. Because basically, at this point, the official uniform of the strange, dark, and mysterious
It's a
is the flannel.
flannel.
And guess what? I have a surprise for you that has to do with flannel just in time for the holidays. I am so excited to share that our brand new official Mr. Ballin flannel is now for sale on shopmrballin.com. But hurry, because quantity is limited. This is a first come, first served situation. But it's not just a flannel. We actually have a whole new collection for the holiday season. And they include things like the Mr. Ballin Christmas sweater. We also have a hat, we have a hoodie, there's a blanket, like a flannel blanket, there's ornaments, there's stickers, there's pins, and much more. But don't wait too long to buy this stuff, because this is a holiday drop, which means if you want it in time for the holidays, you gotta order now. So again, head on over to shopmrballin.com to pick up your official Mr. Ballin flannel, along with all the other great stuff we're dropping for the holiday season. I can't wait to see some of you guys rocking the flannel the next time I go on tour. Happy holidays, everybody.
How did I almost
back to the
forget to
story.
put the lining on? Like, what?
fast forward 3 weeks
Anyway,
to
at least
December
I
8th,
remember before it was
1986.
too late.
So this is 3 weeks after the girls began their therapy. And in those 3 weeks, the Bowen household is totally calm. There's no more tapping, nothing, everything's fine. But on December 8th, Frank, along with his two girls, Tina and Karen, and their friend, Kathleen, they had been out for the evening, maybe getting ice cream or going out to eat or whatever, and they come back to the Bowen household. When they do, it's nighttime, so it's dark outside. Frank goes up to the porch, he goes to the front door, and as he's about to open up the door, he looks through one of the windows of his house, and he sees there are several lights on in the house that he didn't remember leaving on before they left. And so he just thinks, that's weird. Like, I could have sworn I turned those lights off. He's kind of looking back at the girls right behind him, sort of wondering if maybe they left the lights on, but he's like, no, that's weird. So he unlocks the front door, he swings the door open, and immediately he sees this scene inside of his house that makes no sense. The TV is on, the radio is on, and furniture in the first floor of the house where he's looking has clearly been moved. Not dramatically, but things have been moved around on the first floor. Like if you live somewhere, you know where things go. Things are off. Frank, like he's seeing this, he's sort of looking back at Tina and Karen. He's like, did we do this? Are we back to this whole delusion? You gotta remember that even though it's been 3 weeks now of peace in the Bowen household, Frank is all too aware of how insane it was right before then. You know, with the girls, writing on the wall, at least according to him, and thinking there was an evil spirit in their house, and, he's thinking, is this them? Like, somehow did they do this? This feels sort of like a continuation of that. He's looking at the girls, and he's thinking to himself, like, they've been with me. We've been out of the house. How could they do this? But again, Frank is sort of caught. On the one hand, he knows this could be his girls, but he's also thinking that's not possible. And so in that mind state of sort of being caught between these two opposing ideas, Frank, instead of backing out of the house and calling the police like anybody else would do, he instead just begins walking into the house sort of nonchalant, like not really sure how to react. And he begins this sort of half-cocked search through the house. And the whole time, Tina, Karen, and Kathleen, they see what's going on, and the two daughters, they're terrified. I mean, they're all too aware of all the tapping and the writing on the walls. They're thinking, this is real, it's happening again. And so they're tucked up right behind Frank, who again, Frank is in shock. He's just wandering through the house, like, what's going on here? Turns the TV off, he's walking around, turns the radio off, he's moving furniture back around, and he can't believe it. And so he does this weird, again, half-invested search through the first floor. He doesn't find anybody there. He goes to the second floor, does the same search. Again, all three girls, the two daughters and the friend, they're right behind Frank because they're so scared. They do the search on the second floor, nobody there. They search the attic, nobody there either. They go down to the basement, nobody in the basement. There's nobody in the house. And so Frank is like, what is going on here? And then he remembers there's actually a room on the first floor of the house that he forgot to search. It was just a front room of the house right off the front entrance. When he began the search, he just sort of overlooked it because he was sort of in a daze. And so he said, okay, I'll go back up there, I'll search that last room, and then I'll know the whole house is secure. Nobody's here. And so Frank goes back up the basement stairs to the first floor. The girls are tucked up right behind him, still so scared. And he makes his way towards this room, and this room overlooks the front of the property. There are windows looking out to the road. It's just you walk in, there's windows, there's the front of the house, and there's a little closet over to the left. It's like a sitting room. And so Frank, he goes into this room, and right away, he sees on the wall right in front of him, written in shaving cream, are the words, "Marry me." And so Frank, he walks over to the words, and he's staring at them, being like, what is this? Who wrote this? The girls, again, are right behind him, tucked up against the back of his legs, and he's staring. And as he's doing that, he hears movement in the closet in the room that he's in. And Frank turns and he looks at this closet. The doors are open to this closet. It's a dark closet. And out of the closet walks a man who was wearing a dress, Frank's dead wife's dress.
Oh, hell,
this person
freaking
had
hell.
clown makeup on their face.
Oh, shit.
And they were wielding a hatchet. They walk out of the closet and they look at Frank and they look at the girls who are so shocked. They're just in silence staring back at the sky. And this person looks at Frank and goes, you and the girls, go upstairs. And so Frank immediately goes into protector mode, and he gets between the maniac and his girls, and he just tells the girls, go up the stairs, do what he says. and the hatchet-wielding maniac just sort of walks along, following after Frank and the girls. Again, Frank sort of staying between this person and the girls. And so Frank shepherds the girls up the stairs. And he's
That
like,
is
hey,
so
girls,
crazy,
first
like-
bedroom, go in the first bedroom. So they go upstairs. All
Scary.
three girls go into the first bedroom. So Kathleen, Karen, Tina, and then Frank, he goes into the bedroom, and the maniac's right here in the hallway about to follow after Frank. And as soon as Frank gets in the door, Frank shuts the door and pulls it shut. And there's suddenly this struggle between the maniac in the hallway and Frank. The maniac's trying to get in. There's this vicious struggle. And Tina, who's already in this bedroom, just turns, runs, and leaps out the second floor window. And so she smashes the ground. She runs next door to that neighbor's house. She slams on the door. The neighbor comes out, and Tina's screaming about, there's someone in my house. And so the neighbor at this point knows that this is a real emergency. They call the police. And then minutes later, the police show up. And when they get there, they look up at the Bowen household. And Frank Bowen is leaning out of that second floor bedroom. And he's screaming to the police, hey, there's somebody in here. He was just at my door. He's gone. I don't know where he is. And police take it over. They put a ladder up to the window. Frank comes down. They get the other two girls down. So everybody is safely out of the house now. They've been moved over to that neighbor's house. And now the police are going to go into the Bowen household to find this dress-wearing, hatchet-wielding, clown makeup-wearing maniac. They're going to find him and put him into custody. So the police go into the Bowen household, guns drawn. They search that entire property, top to bottom, and they find nothing. Nobody's there. The house is completely vacant. However, they would find a hatchet lying by the back sliding glass door, and the back sliding glass door was partially open. And so ultimately, again, when nobody's found inside the house, the police decide, well, clearly this maniac, if there really was a maniac, is now gone. Because look, the door's open, the hatchet's here, so they're gone. So the police, they go over and talk to Frank and his family, and they're like, look, we don't really know what to think of this. We didn't actually see, this person you claim to have seen in your house. I'm sure there was somebody, but we didn't see them. And so for now, what we're going to do is we're going to monitor your property 24/7 and just see what happens, see if anybody comes in or out. We'll make sure nobody comes to this property. And we'll also begin an investigation in town to try to figure out, who this maniac was. In the meantime, you and your girls go stay with a family friend or something. Just don't be here because we don't know what's going on here. And so Frank and his girls, they went and stayed with a family friend, and the police began their surveillance of the Bowen household. And for 2 days, nothing happened. Nobody went in or out of the Bowen household. And despite police canvassing the town and trying to figure out who this maniac could have been, they really didn't get anywhere. Because remember, Frank's description and the girl's description of this maniac was, probably a man wearing a dress with clown makeup on. And so effectively, this person had a disguise on. There was nothing to go on. So they couldn't find anybody in town. There was no leads, and nobody has come to this house. And they're communicating with Frank Bowen the whole time. Basically, nothing's coming of this case. And so finally, 48 hours after, confronting this maniac in the closet, Frank and his girls, they've been at a family friend's house this whole time. And Frank's like, you know what, it'd be great to get my toiletries and a few other things from my house, because basically they evacuated their house and didn't get a chance to pack or anything. And Frank's thinking, nothing's going on at the house. There's no leads in this case. It's got to be safe to go back to my house for a minute and get the things he needs. And so he tells his girls to stay with his family friend, and Frank, by himself, goes over to his house, and it's broad daylight, and he's expecting to find a police officer who's monitoring his property. He tells the officer, hey, I'm just going in real quick to get some stuff, and they would, let him go in and do that. But when he got to his house, he looked around, and he didn't see any police officer outside the property watching the property. And he's thinking, that's pretty weird. They told me they've been watching my property 24/7. Where are they? But Frank's like, that's weird, whatever. So he gets out of his car and begins walking towards his front door. But as he's walking, for a second, at the corner of his eye, he can swear he can see somebody moving in the second floor of his house. But when he looked up, nobody was there. But he was certain somebody had been moving around up there. And Frank's thinking to himself, wait a minute. Are the police monitoring my house from the inside? Is that what they're doing? They've been in my house? I could have sworn they said they were out of my house. Frank's like, you know what, just in case, I need to call the police because I don't want to walk in there and startle an armed police officer who's basically looking for an intruder. And so Frank, he goes to that neighbor's house and uses their phone and he calls the police and he's like, hey, are you in my house? Is that what you guys have been doing? You've been monitoring my house from the inside? And they're like, no, we have been watching it from the outside. Very likely what's happened here is you've arrived at your house at the exact moment when there is turnover happening between the police officers who are watching it from the outside. Meaning the officer who's been watching your house must have just left, and the incoming officer who will be taking over the next shift is probably on their way, or maybe they're there right now. And in fact, what you should do, Frank, is hang up with us, go back to your property, and very likely the officer will be there or be there soon, and you can talk to them and have them search your house just in case to make sure nobody's in there. And so Frank says, okay, he hangs up the phone, he goes outside, and sure enough, now there is clearly a police officer in a car outside of his property. So Frank goes over and, explains the situation to the officer, and the officer's like, no one's going inside your property. Literally, we have watched this property 24/7, save for a couple of minutes here and there when we're doing turnover, but nobody's gone in or out of your property. But either way, Frank, I'll search your house just to be sure. And so Frank goes back over to the neighbor's house, and this officer goes up to Frank's door, he opens it up, he looks inside, and he can't believe what he's looking at. In the first floor of Frank's house, it's just madness. There are pennies glued to the ceiling of the first floor. And the furniture clearly has been moved all over the place, but it's been stacked in these sort of weird arrangements. And there are glasses of champagne all over the first floor, and there are kitchen knives that have been driven into family photos on the wall. Like the knives are still sticking into the photo, and where these knives have been driven through the photo is always on a picture of either Tina or Karen, the two daughters. And where there are knives in these pictures, above those pictures is written, I'm going to kill you, Tina, or I'm going to kill you, Karen. And so this officer obviously knows, we have a problem here. And so he backs out of the house, he calls for reinforcements, and so all these officers go in, guns drawn, now convinced, clearly somebody has found a way to come in and out of this house, or they're still here, and you have to find them. Like, clearly, the Bowens were not lying about this horrible, maniac that they encountered in the second floor of their house when police first showed up. Clearly, that must have happened, because they didn't do this, somebody else did, and they gotta be here. And so police, they tear the Bowen household apart, looking for this maniac. They look everywhere, and they can't find anybody. There's nobody in the house. And on top of that, it had snowed outside, and before they went in, they made sure they walked around the property to see if there were footsteps coming in or out of the property, and there wasn't. Like, it's not possible what they're seeing. But they've now torn the house up, looking for anything, and they found nothing, other than, again, the madness they've seen with the furniture, the writing, the knives. That's all they found. And so after hours and hours of this very frustrating search, a few of the officers found themselves in the basement, and they're just standing there talking to each other like, this is crazy. We must have missed something. Like, what is it? And at some point, one of those officers who was having that conversation, he had his hand resting on the washing machine, and he's just sitting there like, yeah, what did we miss? What did we miss? And suddenly, as he's leaning against the washing machine moved. And so suddenly there's this gap that's been created by moving the washing
I
machine.
just going around.
And the officer looks at the wall where the machine had been sitting before, and clearly there is a hole on the wall. And the officer gets out his flashlight.
The paint in the kitchen, but you have to get the pan and the
scans down, and he sees there's this tunnel that's been burrowed in the wall of the basement. And it goes over to the corner.
I come in a
Looking
couple
back at
minutes.
this officer is Danny LaPlante. He's crouched down, he's got a hatchet over his shoulder, he's wearing a dress, and he's staring back at this officer. I'm going to tell you about Danny LaPlante because this story takes a very dark turn. So, Danny LaPlante was 16 years old at the time he was pulled out of the wall. And 6 months prior to being pulled out of the Bowen household's wall, Danny had had this very brief interaction with Tina Bowen, the 15-year-old. Apparently they went to school together or had some interaction in town, but Danny had sort of fallen in love or had some sort of romantic interest in Tina, and he felt like Tina had rejected him. Now, Tina did not remember any of this with Danny. This is entirely Danny's memory of what happened. But either way, 6 months earlier, when he had this sense of projection from Tina, Danny responded to that by breaking into the Bowen household, cutting a hole in their walls, and burrowing tunnels in their walls. And for 6 months,
I'm gonna flip this bag.
lived in the Bowen household, in their walls. Now, Danny
Let's flip this bag.
access the
Ooh.
entire house through the wall in the basement. He could basically maneuver in the basement and partially into the first floor, but in order to get to the other parts of the house, Danny had to leave the wall. And so routinely, over these 6 months that he was in their house, Danny would literally, while the family was home, just get out and wander through their house, like as the family is just living there, and they never noticed him. So for 6 months, Danny spied on that family 24/7. And when the girls had that seance with the Ouija board to try to contact their mother, Danny was downstairs in the basement in the walls watching. And he saw an opportunity. He thought, I'm going to pretend to be their mother and screw with them. And so when they heard that tapping sound, that was Danny pretending to be their mom. He was absolutely trying to get them to believe their mother was here. But then whenever Frank was around, Danny would stop the tapping and sort of let Frank believe the girls were making it up. And then gradually, Danny sort of transitioned from it's your mom and it's good to actively trying to terrify the girls. He began tapping at all hours of the night. He began sneaking out of the wall, going upstairs to the girls' bedroom, flicking the undersides of their beds, going in their closet, tapping in their closet, and then making sure to be hidden or escape before Frank came in. I mean, this is absolutely psychotic behavior. But it gets worse. So Danny is taken out of the walls and he's arrested. And 10 months later, when he is awaiting trial, Danny is released on bail. And while he is on bail, he would sneak into another family's house in Massachusetts, the Gustafson's house, and unfortunately, that family would not escape Danny. Danny would murder 3 members of that family for really no particular reason. He just picked a family and killed them. And so very likely, if Tina had not leapt out of the second floor window when Danny revealed himself in that dress with the hatchet and got them to go up to that bedroom, if Tina hadn't leapt out and if Frank hadn't held off the door like that, almost certainly Danny was corralling that family into that room to kill them with the hatchet. But Tina basically saved their lives. As of this video, Danny LaPlante is still alive and he's serving multiple consecutive life sentences, and he actually recently was put up for parole. He didn't get it, he did not get parole, but during his hearing for his parole, when he was rejected, he was determined to be one of the most psychopathic inmates in the entire prison system. And now, here is a clip from the latest episode of Redacted. Enjoy.
On June 7th, 1998, CNN News Group CEO Tom Johnson sat at his desk in his corner office, overlooking the massive newsroom in Midtown Atlanta. Below him, the workspace buzzed with energy. Journalists darted between desks, and banks of monitors flickered with breaking news reports. Johnson was in his element and loved his job. He was known as a no-nonsense leader, and he was well respected by his team. In the nearly 20 years since CNN first launched, the 24-hour cable network had become the most influential source in television news. It changed the landscape for how people learned about breaking news, with correspondents all over the world ready to report at a moment's notice. It was Johnson's job to build on CNN's dominance and drive up the ratings. Johnson turned when he heard a tap on his door. His secretary rushed in and said he had a call from a retired general who was CNN's military analyst. She warned him that the general sounded annoyed, but Johnson was used to putting out fires, dealing with people who were upset, so his secretary's warning didn't alarm him. As soon as Johnson picked up the phone, the general's bristling tone made it clear he was outraged. He told the CEO he'd received some disturbing news. The general had been informed that a segment about a covert military operation in Southeast Asia was scheduled to air on CNN the next night. And apparently this report contained wild allegations about the U.S. military gassing villages, killing American soldiers, and even innocent civilians. Johnson tried to respond, but couldn't get a word in. The general railed that neither he nor CNN's other top military analysts had been consulted about such a damning report. Johnson took a deep breath and said that the general was right. They did plan to air a segment tomorrow night about a covert military operation during the Vietnam War. It was the first episode of a new show called CNN Newsstand, a collaboration with Time magazine. Johnson assured him the story had taken almost a year of careful investigative journalism, but nothing Johnson said swayed the general. He insisted they pull the show. Johnson wasn't about to back down either. Too much work had gone into the episode about a secret military operation called Operation Tailwind. Besides, CNN
Okay,
had already been
so
promoting it heavily.
here's the 2
It was
bags.
simply too late to pull.
Super cute.
There was silence on the other end.
I have one more
Then the
bag to
general
make,
spoke
just like
in an
this.
ominous tone. He told
But I'm
Johnson
happy
he was
to be
about
done.
make the biggest mistake in history.
Okay, I was live earlier and the phone
Johnson
died,
sticks
so
around. He
I
ended the
lost
call by
that
saying
footage.
that the story was going to be a bombshell.
So you
Johnson
guys,
would be
until
right. The
tomorrow.
story would explode in a way
Hold on.
he never saw coming.
I'll check that. Oh crap, this part. I went in too much here. Oh well, I'm not fixing it. Just
Today we have a
I
special
went in
video
a little
for
bit
us. It'll be a collection of
too
4
much.
fan favorites. about
Anyway,
supernatural
each bag
encounters.
has like
These stories have all been completely re-edited, so even if you
You
have
have,
heard or seen them before,
pocket
it'll be a
space.
brand new viewing experience. But
I don't
before we
really
get into
have a
those
bag
stories,
tag
if you're a
for the
fan of
outside
Strange,
yet,
Dark, and
so
Mysterious delivered in story
but
format, then you come to
this
the
is
right
how
place
it's
because that's all we do, and we
done.
upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, the next time the like button is doing stand-up comedy, as they're getting ready to deliver a joke, yell out the punchline. Also, please subscribe to our channel, turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into
Alright, you
today's stories.
guys. I will see y'all tomorrow. To start the 3rd bag. Bye. Thank you for joining.
In
Thank you for giving me your
2006, Susan Lewis
time.
and her daughter Jamie
And I will
moved
see
into a
you
new home
tomorrow.
in Southern California. It was this nice
Okay.
little house that they referred to as